August 17, 1943, 26,000 feet above Regensburg, Germany. The air is thin and cold enough to freeze saliva before it leaves the mouth. Inside the waist gun positions of a B-17 Flying Fortress, Sergeant James Miller watches contrails materialize against the blue. Elegant white lines that curve and intersect like chalk strokes on a vast canvas. Beautiful, almost. Then the lines resolve into shapes. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, 12 of them, climbing hard from 4 o'clock low. Miller's hands find the twin grips of his .50 caliber machine gun, but he does not fire. Not yet. Around him in identical positions across the formation of 230 bombers, other gunners wait with the same disciplined patience. The Luftwaffe had, by the summer of 1943, developed what it considered an almost scientific understanding of American bomber tactics. 2 years of combat over occupied Europe had taught German fighter pilots the rhythms of B-17 and B-24 defensive fire, the effective range of the .50 caliber Browning, the blind spots beneath the fuselage and directly ahead, the tendency of inexperienced gunners to open fire too early and waste ammunition on impossible deflection shots. Luftwaffe training doctrine emphasized exploitation of these patterns, diving attacks from 12 o'clock high where only the top turret could respond effectively, or running attacks from 6 o'clock low through the vulnerable tail position. German pilots learned to judge the moment when American gunners would panic and fire wildly, creating gaps in the defensive screen. They learned to read desperation in scattered tracer patterns. For a time, this knowledge gave them control of the engagement, the psychological advantage of fighting an enemy whose reactions had become predictable. Then the pattern changed. In the spring of 1943, 8th Air Force gunnery officers implemented a new defensive doctrine that transformed each bomber formation from a collection of individual aircraft into a single integrated weapon system. The innovation was deceptively simple. Staggered fire patterns coordinated across the entire formation. Instead of each gunner engaging targets as they appeared, gunners were trained to fire in deliberate sequence, creating overlapping fields of fire that filled the approach vectors with continuous but controlled bursts. The lead aircraft gunners would engage at maximum range, over 1,000 yards, forcing attacking fighters to maneuver. As the fighters adjusted course and closed distance, the next rank of bombers would open fire, then the next, creating a rolling barrage that pursued the enemy aircraft through their attack run. Most critically, gunners were trained to conserve ammunition, to fire in disciplined 3 to 5 second bursts rather than continuous streams, ensuring that at any given moment, some guns in the formation were loaded and ready while others fired.
German pilots encountered this new defensive scheme over Hamburg, over Schweinfurt, over the deep penetration raids into southern Germany where Luftwaffe fighters could attack without fear of Allied escort. What they experienced defied their training. Major Heinrich Erler, a Luftwaffe ace with over 200 combat missions, described it in his combat report. The Americans have learned to shoot like soldiers, not frighten children. Where before there was panic fire, now there is system. You cannot find the gap because the gap moves, closes, reappears elsewhere. It is like attacking a machine that thinks. The staggered pattern meant that a German pilot who timed his approach to exploit a momentary ceasefire in one aircraft's guns would fly directly into fresh fire from another bomber he had not been watching. The visual effect, seen from the cockpit of a Focke-Wulf 190, closing at 300 miles per hour, was of a wall of tracers that seemed to dance and shift, that anticipated his movements rather than reacting to them. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the tactical advantage. Luftwaffe fighter pilots, among the most experienced and aggressive in the world, had built their confidence on the assumption that bomber formations were essentially defensive targets, dangerous but ultimately passive, able to absorb punishment but not to truly threaten a skilled pilot who understood their limitations. The staggered fire pattern inverted this relationship. Now, approaching a bomber formation required flying through multiple sequential walls of fire, each time to catch aircraft at their most vulnerable moment of the attack run. German pilots began reporting what American intelligence officers initially dismissed as exaggeration, that the bombers seemed to be communicating, that the fire patterns appeared coordinated beyond what individual gunners could achieve in the chaos of combat. They were correct, but they misunderstood the mechanism. It was not communication in the moment,
It was training so thorough that it created spontaneous coordination, a collective defensive consciousness born from thousands of hours of practice in which gunners learned to read not just the enemy, but each other's fire. The tracer round became the symbol of this transformation, one round in every 5 loaded with phosphorus that burned bright enough to mark trajectories visible for miles. Before the staggered pattern, tracers revealed desperation, wild streams of light chasing fighters across impossible angles of deflection. After the new doctrine took hold, tracers became something else, evidence of control, a fire so precisely directed that each burst told a story of calculation rather than fear. German pilots learned to read these stories. Scattered tracers meant inexperienced crews. Targets of opportunity. Disciplined sequential tracer patterns meant veteran formations where survival required perfect execution or disengagement. The Luftwaffe began selecting targets based on defensive fire patterns, avoiding formations that demonstrated coordinated gunnery, seeking out stragglers or replacement crews whose fire discipline had not yet matured. This selection pressure itself became a weapon. The most dangerous American formations were the ones Germans refused to attack.
By late 1943, Luftwaffe loss rates against deep penetration raids had increased by 40%, even as the number of fighters committed to defense grew. General-Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of Luftwaffe fighter forces, identified American defensive gunnery as a primary factor in unsustainable pilot attrition. In conferences with Goering and Luftwaffe High Command, he argued for development of standoff weapons, rockets and heavy cannon that could engage bombers beyond the range of coordinated defensive fire. These weapons emerged in 1944, but by then, long-range American fighters had arrived to escort the bombers deep into Germany, and the tactical problem had shifted again. The moment when German fighters could attack bomber formations with impunity, when the outcome depended on individual pilot skill against gunner panic, had closed. The staggered fire pattern had bought time measured in months, but months that proved decisive. After the war, a Luftwaffe pilot named Franz Stiegler, who had flown against American bombers throughout 1943, was asked what he most remembered about the daylight raids. He did not speak of the bombers he had shot down or the friends he had lost. He spoke of fire patterns. You could tell, even from a distance, which formations had been together for many missions. Their tracers moved like music, like rhythm. Not random, not afraid, just relentless. We called it the American Wall. You could break through it, yes, but something would break in you as well. The metaphor was precise. The staggered fire pattern was indeed a wall, but one built not of steel or concrete, but of training, discipline, and an underlying belief that individual skill, when multiplied by coordination and supported by industrial abundance of ammunition, could transform defensive necessity into offensive capability. The sky above Germany in 1943 became a classroom where two philosophies met at terminal velocity. The Luftwaffe, built on the cult of the ace, the individual pilot whose skill could overcome numerical disadvantage, faced an American system that elevated the collective over the individual, that turned ordinary men into instruments of a coordinated defense more formidable than any single genius. The staggered fire pattern was never about making better gunners. It was about making gunners who were better together, who understood that their survival depended not on personal glory, but on the man in the next aircraft firing when they reloaded, on trust so deep it functioned like instinct. The tracers that laced the sky were not just projectiles. They were proof that democracy's strength lay not in exceptional individuals, but in the exceptional capacity of ordinary people to act as one, to create through cooperation something more powerful than tyranny could forge through command. The wall of fire moved, breathed, adapted, and in its rhythm was the heartbeat of a free people who had learned to fight not as heroes, but as a system. And systems, in the end, defeated genius.